Hey guys, this is Eckhart's Ladder. Hello and welcome to another video over here on X2. Now, today's video will be a little bit different than normal, a bit more of a lore video, almost like something you would find on the Eckhart's Ladder channel. But I'm going to include this as part of my Fleet Command series, even though we won't be talking about Empire at War. I think it's a good sort of catch-all for any strategy videos I do, especially ones that actually bring in real Star Wars lore, which is what we'll be doing today. Looking at real Starfighter techniques from Star Wars Legends that you can use when Star Wars Squadrons comes out. Now, obviously, I haven't played Squadrons yet. I've only seen the gameplay trailers and read all the articles and whatnot like you guys, but we know enough about the game to get a good idea of how it will play and what strategies you can use. For example, we know that each individual Starfighter class will operate differently and uniquely. Interceptors will be different than bombers and fighters. You guys get the idea. We also know that the movement very clearly matches the description of movement from Star Wars Legends. We have those sort of drifts, which in Legends are done using etheric rudders. We have the ability to quickly stop and start, and the distinctions between X-Wings and TIE Fighters, and just generally Rebel ships and Imperial ships, is maintained as per the lore, unlike, say, for example, Star Wars Battlefront 2. With that being said, let's dive deep into some Legends strategies, and unsurprisingly, we are going to start with the greatest military mind in Star Wars Legends, Grand Admiral Thrawn himself. So let's go to the second book of the Thrawn trilogy, Dark Force Rising, and the Battle of Sarka. There's a very specific lesson we can learn from reading about Thrawn's tactics here, and that is how you take advantage of a starfighter's weaknesses while making sure that they can't use their greatest strengths. And this tactic works especially well when fighting really highly specialized fighters like TIE Interceptors or A-Wings. Speaking of the A-Wing, here's what Thrawn said about the craft. Excellent fighters, A-Wings, not without their limitations though, particularly here. High-speed craft like that are far more suited to hit and fade operations than to escort duty. And he's right. In this case, A-Wings were attempting to protect a bulk freighter, and their speed, which ordinarily would be their greatest strength, became a weakness because they can't just fly around and stop escorting their ship. They've got to stay slow, they've got to stay close to it so they can protect it from Thrawn's fighters. And because of that, their greatest strength cannot be implemented, and the weaknesses that appear because they've given up so much to gain that speed can be further exploited. For example, A-Wings, because they're meant for speed, don't have great shielding, and their weaponry is not up to, say, an X-Wing. So if you can fight them in a case where they can't use their speed, well, you've got a serious advantage. Now, this might seem obvious, but always keep in mind the strength of each fighter during space combat. If you can get a Y-Wing away from a capital ship that it can bomb, you've got an advantage. An unescorted support ship like a TIE Reaper, too, will probably be an easier target, because that's not how it's meant to operate. And also think about that when you're flying your ships. If you've got a TIE Interceptor, you want to rely on your speed, and you don't want to get in situations where you have to fly slowly, but are forced to fight a better armed and armored fighter. If you're a Y-Wing, you probably don't want to be caught in situations where you're far away from a bombing target or just in open space. But let's move on, and specifically I want to look at the Rebel Alliance sourcebook, which is, in my opinion, the greatest source of Rebel Starfighter tactics. The book has not only stuff about squad fighting, which I'll come back to later, but also individual maneuvers that fighters can use in the heat of battle. There's also general dogfighting principles, like the importance of remaining undetected and the fact that the first starfighter to spot the enemy almost always wins, so rely on passive systems and stealth whenever possible. There's the fact that having some sort of wing commander or flight controller is absolutely essential, and in-game, that basically means that you're going to want to be coordinating with your squadron so you have a full idea of what's going on during any specific battle. When you do attack, you want to use the principles of speed and concealment. Concealment obviously being the fact that you want to attack unnoticed, and speed being the idea that you want to attack going at a full clip so you can turn and maneuver, make yourself difficult to hit, and really capitalize on that element of surprise. So in game, that might mean, for example, the high risk tactical decision to put all all of your energy into weapons and engines instead of shielding if you really have that enemy in a vulnerable position. It's much better to be decisive, and when you're picking your loadout for your fighter, you've really got to figure out how you can best take advantage of your fighter's key strengths. We see, for example, in the gameplay trailer that you can modify an A-Wing to use stealth features. So save your explosiveness for when you see an enemy or when an enemy sees you, and then hit them extraordinarily hard and end the battle quickly. Something like a head-on attack obviously will happen, but is really not desirable because it's pretty much a coin toss. The best place to attack is obviously from behind, where the enemy can't generally return fire. There are several strategies you can use to coax the enemy into attacking you in this way. One way, for example, would be to pair up with a second pilot, have the first one flying and make themselves seem like an easy target, and then once a hapless rebel or Imperial has jumped onto their tail, you come from behind and finish them off. Basically, it's a booby trap that you spring and attack decisively once you're ready. Another tactic would be to put your shields full at front and recklessly engage a starfighter from head on while one of your squadron mates attacks from the side, knowing again that your enemy will be goaded into an attack by what appears to be not very intelligent piloting. If you can coordinate this type of attack on a squadron level, then you can really bring in some next level tactics, including the feint and backstab maneuver, where a pair of fighters basically aggroes two Imperials and then a second pair comes in and cleans them up. And again, this is all about communication, so make sure you have some sort of in-game voice chat, Discord, Skype, or something running which will allow you to communicate with your entire squadron. And if you're the feinting starfighters, for example, in this situation, you know that you're probably not going to actually engage the enemy, so take all energy out of your weapons and put it instead towards your shields and your engine. However, frequently you won't have the time to make these complicated maneuvers, and you'll simply have to be fighting one-on-one against an enemy. If they're in the really vulnerable spot, i.e. right behind you, there are a few techniques you can use to try to break their lock on your ship. Appropriately, one of these is called the brake. Essentially, when the enemy has locked on to you, you simply hit the brakes on your starfighter, let them fly past, and then you attempt to shoot them. This not only has the ability to get you in a better position, but at the very least can disrupt their targeting. Brakes work most effectively if the enemy is not right on your tail, so make sure before you brake that you pull lots of sharp turns, and that way you can really get behind the enemy and give them the best opportunity to overshoot you. The Alliance sourcebook has other more detailed maneuvers that you guys can learn yourselves, especially if you have the help of a friend who's also interested in starfighter combat. But the general principle always when you're being tailed is to jink, which is move back and forth, basically try to stay out of the sights of the enemy, and some of these specific maneuvers will actually help you turn the tides so you can get right behind them, which is what it's all about. Before I move on though, the Rebel Alliance sourcebook does have one more good point that I want to talk about, and that is disengagement. Just because you've destroyed one starfighter does not whatsoever mean that you are out of danger. The starfighter could have a second pilot protecting him, you could just run into another enemy fighter, so remain vigilant. However, if you somehow don't manage to destroy a fighter during a dogfight, then there's a couple of approaches. First of all, if you had the advantage, you want to continue to push. Be very aggressive. You do not want the tables to become balanced for each fighter to have a neutral chance again to bring it back to even. However, if you're the one who is almost dead, then you do want to bring the tables back even. You want to get each fighter in neutral position. That means acting erratically, and if necessary, engaging the enemy head on. Again, I recommend you check out the sourcebook because it does a good job of breaking down the 5 stages of starfighter combat, which are detection and identification, closing, attack, maneuver, and disengagement, and it gives really good strategies for being successful at each one of these points, albeit biased to the Alliance. That's mostly been about starfighter combat though. There are more details about how to take down capital ships, for example, as starfighters. Now, this is one we can speculate a little less about because we don't know exactly how Star Wars shields will work. In Legends, typically you'd overwhelm a portion of a shield and then continue to fire on at the hull, so ideally you want multiple starfighters coming together to concentrate at a single spot. Now, it is quite likely that At the very least, that principle of sustained damage will be important because shields will recharge. So we'll have to figure out the best strategies for that, as well as which hard points to target first when the game actually relaunches and we get our hands on it. The last thing I want to talk about is squadron composition, and this is one thing that's covered pretty heavily in the X-Wing series. Although usually in those books there's 12 starfighters, there's still a lot we can actually learn. So typically starfighters would each have a wingman, then you'd have individual groups or flights within an overall squadron, usually 3 with 4 starfighters in each flight. Obviously that won't quite work the same in this situation because we're limited to 5 fighters a side, plus maybe some AI controlled fighters as well. Still, I think the principle of having a neighboring starfighter or a second pilot or wingman with you most times will work, especially if executed properly, because this is something that you won't really see a lot of teams, at least ones that aren't super organized, actually do. So if you can have a buddy and you can work together, you'll win every head-to-head battle, you'll be able to pull off some of these more advanced maneuvers like the feint that we talked about earlier, and just generally you will be much more effective. I'm of the impression or the belief that it's probably best if your wingman has the same starfighter. So without playing the game, I'm thinking it would probably be pretty good for almost every squadron to have 2 X-Wings which stick together, just because they're so good and they're just general space superiority fighters, or maybe 2 A-Wings. I think it's better to have the same starfighter because if you have an A-Wing and an X-Wing, one of those 2 fighters is being gimped. The A-Wing, for example, will not be able to use its full speed and still keep up with the X-Wing and provide meaningful support. And as we discussed earlier, if it's not flying at full speed, it's losing out on its greatest advantage. So maybe you have a flight of 2 X-Wings, you have an A-Wing or a U-Wing, which is a rover, and then you have a couple of bombers. These individual flights or duos coordinate together, and that's basically how you plan a battle. Going back now to the Rebel sourcebook, there's even more detail about how squadrons should work together. For example, there's this interesting diagram, which may not be super relevant just because of how fast-paced the battles will be, which shows how squadrons should actually, and this is sort of against what you'd think, spend 75% of their time scanning a relatively small portion of space, and then 25% of the time basically scanning space which is shared by their wingman. Whether you find that useful or not, I'm not sure, but hopefully there was something within this video that you enjoyed and that will help you when going, of course, to Star Wars Squadrons. But really just know the strengths and weaknesses of your fighter. Know how you're dying the most. Know where you're failing in the 5 stages of engagement. Are the enemies always spotting you before you get into the battle? Well, it's just like when you have that problem in Halo, for example. In that case, you need to get better at map control and being aware of where your enemies are. So that includes tapping into team communication and a whole lot of other things. Are you being killed in the head-to-head battles? Well, that probably means that you're not choosing your battles well and you're not engaging the enemy properly. Are you being killed right after fighting another starfighter? Well, you need to work on your disengagement. Keep all of that in mind and also retool your ship whenever needed to try to make the most effective fighter you can. And whenever possible, I think it'll be a really good advantage to play this game with friends. So get some buddies, get them really interested, and get excited because Star Wars Squadrons is coming very soon and we'll be streaming a ton of it on this channel. And even with this video, I still probably won't be very good. Anyway guys, this has been all for today. If you enjoyed content like this, check out the main channel. We've got lots of lore videos, but also subscribe here to X2 and turn notifications on. Previously in the Fleet Academy series, we've covered how to fight like Thrawn in Empire at War and how to beat much bigger fleets. So check those out. Anyway, until next time guys, this has been Justin. As always, may the Force be with you.